I'm Ian, and honestly, I can't think of anything clever or funny to say. I'm just in shock that this exists.
They brought back Pac-Man World. I honestly cannot believe it. Holy shit. One of my favorite series as a kid that I never ever thought would see the light of day again, and yet here we are with a new installment. You know, ish. It's a remake of the original PS1 game, which you may remember I reviewed a few years ago, and found to be a very fun, if janky and awkwardly paced, 3D platformer that, despite its flaws, is well worth looking into. You should watch that video if you haven't, it's really good. But yeah, a remake. I gotta say, I never saw that coming. Well, I say never saw it coming, but honestly, once I saw the interactive hub area in Pac-Man Museum Plus, I kinda had high hopes. Also, that collection slaps, you should absolutely check it out, just not on Xbox because that version has lag.
But I digress. Pac-Man World's back, and I can't not talk about it because, honestly, they kinda nailed it. I really, really like this game.
It's not perfect, I have my issues with it, but when it was announced as a $30 budget title, and after seeing some gameplay, I honestly had my expectations set relatively low. I was still excited to see the Pac-Man World brand get brought back at all, but I kind of figured it would be underwhelming, passable at best.
But instead, this is one of my favorite releases of this year, and I want to talk about why that is, and why it may well be the definitive version of this game. So, without further ado, let's check out Pac-Man World Re-Pac.
The game opens up in much the same way as the original, with a cutscene showing the ghosts kidnapping Pac-Man's family leading up to his birthday party. In the original, characters were fully voiced when they spoke, but here they kinda do the Banjo-Kazooie gibberish thing. It's fine, I don't really have a preference. Anyway, the ghosts nab everyone on behalf of Pac-Man and... aww.
They removed his guttural scream of horror! I changed my mind, this remake sucks.
Pac-Man rushes off to Ghost Island to confront the evil Pac-Man and save his family, and after a serviceable but slightly less striking title screen compared to the original game, we're dropped off in the first stage, Buccaneer Beach, and yeah, it's Pac-Man World alright. Linear 3D platforming with a side-facing camera, and honestly, my first impressions were pretty mixed, mostly because the game crashed and deleted my save data after clearing the first stage. Yeah, that's not great.
Worth noting that only did happen the one time though, so I don't really hold it against the game. I just thought it was kinda funny.
Once I got the game loaded back up and replayed the first stage though, I was struck by just how great the control is. Pac-Man in the original game was very responsive and snappy, but had a weird, heavy feeling to his movement, probably due to the fact that it was hard locked to 8 directions for, pretty obvious reasons given the hardware. Here though, it's smooth 360-degree analog movement with all the snappiness that the original had while removing that slightly frustrating, weighty feeling. I love it. All of Pac-Man's movement options feel great actually. His jump arc is satisfying, that spin dash style rev roll move is much more reliable with full analog control to aim it, and the butt bounce move you can do by pressing jump in midair is still as amazing and satisfying as a platforming tool as it was in the original.
So with the basic core mechanics being improved so much, it stands to reason then that the game as a whole is just better than the original. Well, yeah, for the most part. Let's start with what works.
The game itself is ultimately still Pac-Man World 1, and given that fact, most of what I said before still applies. The level design is as tight and engaging as ever, with some really tense and satisfying platforming, and ultimately, the game doesn't do much to try and change that, which kinda makes sense. Levels do feel better to play though, thanks to Pac-Man's improved control, and I guess due to Pac-Man moving a little bit quicker here, the pacing is greatly improved. I think a large part of that has to do with the new hover mechanic. It basically works like Yoshi's flutter jumper. No, wait, actually, maybe it's closer to Klonoa's hover. Given that it's Namco, that was probably on purpose. Anyway, Pac-Man can now hover for a second in midair, which I didn't really expect to use, but it is great for all the backtracking Pac-Man World 1 is so fond of. I also just generally found myself playing much more recklessly since I have the safety net, and I gotta say, that was a lot of fun. As a result, I found myself actively seeking out all the collectibles that I often blew off in the PS1 game, which is ironic since here, they're never required. See, in the PS1 game, you were required to rescue Pac-Man's family to unlock the final boss, while here, they're entirely optional, just offering help during the battle. Which is great, because it means you can skip any, unsavory characters you may encounter.
Never forget what they took. Okay, actually, yeah, we need to talk about this.
What the fuck is this? Okay, so thanks to the ongoing royalty issues regarding Ms. Pac-Man, Bandai Namco opted to replace her with the new character Pacmum. I hate her. Like, look, I love Ms. Pac-Man, but if replacing her is what it took to get the game released, then yes, obviously it was worth it. But Pac-Man, my guy, couldn't you at least make your girl a little pleasing to look at? Like, holy shit, this design is hideous. Her eyes are completely different from the other characters, so that sticks out like a sore thumb. Her feet are so tiny, it looks like they should fucking snap under her weight, and where's her nose?
I thought I said I liked this game.
Okay, anyway, good stuff, the maze levels. Just like in the original game, you can find fruit to unlock doors throughout the levels, and behind Galaxian doors, you'll find classic Pac-Man maze stages. In the original, these sucked. They were bad. The mazes were cramped, the health and lives used in mazes carried over from the main game, they moved way too slowly, and they were full of obstacles that were clearly at odds with the constant movement in the OG Pac-Man formula. Basically, all of this is addressed in the new game with a separate set of lives, much snappier movement, even including the little sparks from the Championship Edition games to show that you're about to cut a corner quickly, and still obstacles that are at odds with how Pac-Man maneuvers the maze. But this is entirely mitigated by how power pellets work now, since in addition to letting you eat the ghost, it also turns you totally invulnerable. Also large. This basically means that the mazes become a mad dash to the power pellet and then just clearing the dots as rapidly as possible while you can move around unimpeded, which isn't really the point of classic Pac-Man's gameplay. It's meant to be more about strategizing and planning a route through the maze while avoiding the ghost, but hey, it's fun, so who cares?
This change to the power pellets actually applies to the main platforming stages as well, and I mean, I wouldn't say it's an improvement, but it's fine.
I kind of enjoyed how ghosts in the original game were basically an extended platforming challenge, grabbing a power pellet then rushing over to eat them while you were able to. It was fun and made them pretty easily the most memorable enemies in the game to me. That's still basically the case here, but since eating the dot means you're all big and have limited movement, the platforming aspect is heavily downplayed, with temporary platforms usually spawning in to simplify things. The actual act of eating the ghost is still immensely satisfying, but it is slightly lame that eating all of any group of ghosts doesn't net you a health refill anymore. Even the shitty GBA port did that. The other power-ups from the PS1 version also come back here. The super butt bounce is as inconsequential as ever and doesn't even look cool like in the original, but it's fine. The real star here ends up being the metal ball, surprisingly. In the original, it shows up so you can run around underwater, and like that is still the case here, but it shows up way more often and is almost a requirement since certain enemies are also metal and can only be defeated when you're powered up, which I actually really like, especially since it also now changes your weight and makes you heavier, increasing the difficulty during platforming segments. This makes it a very nice bit of risk versus reward since you gotta choose either eliminating enemies or easier platforming. It's subtle, but I like it. Honestly, enemies are just handled better here in general thanks to the much more reliable collision detection and the fact that all enemies can be killed now instead of some being arbitrarily invulnerable. Doesn't stop these stupid purple fucks from the alien levels from being a nightmare, but hey, at least the Pac dot throw reaches farther now, so taking them down is a little less painful than in the original.
Speaking of improvements to the combat, oh my god, the boss fights are great now.
I always appreciated the variety that the bosses offered in the original game, but the execution was definitely lacking. The ideas were generally very solid, but the difficulty was just bonkers. Like, some late game bosses were total jokes, while earlier bosses were so difficult, it basically just felt like luck if you defeated them. Now, almost every boss is legitimately excellent, and at the very least an improvement over the original. The emphasis on almost every boss. I think the best examples here are Anubis Rex and King Galaxian. Both fights in the original had really solid foundations that were marred by intense difficulty spikes. Now, both boss battles are excellent, with King Galaxian having auto fire and Pac-Man having a much smaller hitbox, making avoiding shots actually, like, doable. And honestly, Anubis Rex might be the best boss in the game now. The basic idea is the same as the original. Rev-roll these platforms until the boss is open to damage, while dodging increasingly complex waves of attacks he throws at you. But unlike the original, you have more room to actually dodge his attacks. And I emphasize this once again, the collision detection is so vastly improved, and dodging his attacks is extremely rewarding and challenging now, instead of being a literal gamble. A few of the bosses were also just entirely overhauled. Chrome Keeper is actually really fun now, since you attack him directly, and the Clown Race is a first-person thing and controls a little better now, but I gotta say, I don't exactly love what they did with Pac-Man. I like how he shows up before all the other fights now to grant them a little more cohesion instead of feeling like Pac-Man is just assaulting random people like Ezra Miller on Power Pellets, but the actual boss fight is the only one I'd call a downgrade. It's not awful, if anything, it's actually still a very fun and energetic battle, but the original was just such an excellent final boss, with every move he uses being a reflection of a move that you use that you need to use to damage him. Here, you just kind of attack him till he dies. The extra phases are cool, one requiring the metal pellet and the other being sort of a shadow of the Pac-Man thing, but the original still felt a little more intense and intimate to me. Whatever, it's still fine, and it's a decent final boss in its own right. One debatably worse boss versus the original does not negate how vastly improved the rest of these fights are.
Despite the long list of improvements made here, there are still some things I take issue with in this remake, mostly involving issues with the controls and physics.
Like I said, by and large, Pac-Man feels much better to control here, but one thing that does not feel better is swimming. It basically works like the swimming in 2D Mario games, where you constantly sink and tap jump to bob yourself upwards. In the original game, Pac-Man swims in whatever direction you're moving, and swimming up and down are mapped to X and triangle, and otherwise he'd stay level. It wasn't particularly fun since it was very slow. In fact, it got insanely insanely tedious in some later levels, so I get why they changed it, but the issue is that the levels are designed for these older, more precise controls, since threading the needle through obstacles that were easy to get around in the original now feels like you're just trying to play Flappy Bird. It's not great.
And weirdly enough, they changed how moving platforms work, specifically in regards to how Pac-Man carries his momentum from them, or in this case, how he doesn't.
In the original, Pac-Man would carry momentum from a platform when jumping off of them. Now he doesn't, he has fixed jumping momentum. This might not seem like all that big of a deal, but the circus world is entirely built around this mechanic, especially the level Spin Dizzy, which is often considered the toughest level in the original game. The entirety of the stage is based on trying to figure out how to jump from platform to platform as they all spin and shift. It's challenging, but immensely rewarding, and gives some of the most satisfying and memorable platforming in the entire game. Now it's absolutely trivial since every single jump is exactly the same. It honestly ruins the level, which is a damn shame. This is an honest-to-God downgrade.
Don't get me wrong though, the improvements here vastly outweigh the downgrades, and speaking of improvement, those graphics.
Yeah, this looks pretty great. Like, look, I get it. It's not the most technically impressive game on the market, but I really do love the way this game looks. Environments are vibrant and feel very faithful to the original, with perhaps a smidge more variety between stages, and I absolutely adore the new models for Pac-Man and the Ghosts. I might not be the biggest fan of how a few members of the Pac fam look, but hey, I dig the new Talkman design a lot, which is good since, like I said, you see a lot more of him this time. In fact, you see him in every level now, since the token to end the stage is hidden within a destructible statue of him, which I think is really nice. It lends a great sense of cohesion to these very wacky and varied environments. I also like that Pac-Man still does a little balancing animation when he's on a moving platform. It's not important, I just like it. What I don't really like is the HUD. I mean, it's fine, I guess, maybe a little mobile game looking, but in the original, it was only on screen when it was relevant. Now, your health and collectible letters and stuff are just always on screen. I don't know, I just don't like it as much. And while yes, that's definitely a nitpick, what's less of a nitpick is the performance. I played this on my PS5. Why does it not run at 60 FPS? It certainly tries to, but it stutters and drops frames constantly. I won't lie and pretend like it affected gameplay in any meaningful way. I got used to it after the first couple levels, but I can't help but feel like this probably should have been better optimized. It's not like this hardware isn't capable of pushing 60 FPS on some very demanding titles. I also found the music odd. It's certainly not bad. Pac-Man World has a killer soundtrack, and for the most part, this is just using uncompressed versions of the PS1 songs, which is great, but for a few stages, it features new renditions, and I don't know, it's kind of got a Sonic Origins thing going on for me, where the new remix of certain stages just sound more compressed and off than the originals. Never bad, just why do they do this? My favorite song in the game, Under Pressure, suffers this fate, and it's just weird. This new rendition is fine, but the original is so clearly better, so why change it if the other tracks got left alone? Whatever, I'm kinda being nitpicky. The game does look and sound great, aside from those performance issues.
One last thing before we wrap up, we gotta talk about the credits.
The way they're presented is fun enough, a long scrolling maze sequence where you collect dots and letters and jam out to a cute song, but the issue is they don't credit people, namely the entire original Pac-Man World dev team, which isn't great since the level design and music are note for note the same as in the original game. Bandai Namco has addressed this on Twitter, but as of me recording the script, they still aren't credited, so hopefully that's fixed because, as is, this is just gross.
But yeah, that's Pac-Man World Re-Pac, and holy shit, that is how you do a remake.
It's got some performance issues and design changes in a few areas that I don't necessarily agree with, but oh man, what a game, what a remake! It looks great, it feels great, and it fixes the majority of issues I have with the original game, especially in regards to pacing thanks to the much snappier controls and easier backtracking. This is easily the definitive version of Pac-Man World 1, and although it's probably still not my favorite game in the series, it is a pretty strong contender, and absolutely where I'd suggest anyone interested in Pac-Man World give the series a try. The amount of love and care poured into this project absolutely shocked me, given the $30 price tag, and I cannot recommend it enough.
Yeah, I'm pretty thrilled with Re-Pac, but what do you think of the game and of the video in general? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more from me. Until next time, guys, I'm LyingTuna, signing out. Bye.